Good evening. My name is Howard Edelman, and I'm your host of Israel and the Jewish World. In the November 1947 UN partition resolution, Jerusalem was to be internationalized. That never happened. Jordan occupied East Jerusalem. Israel took over West Jerusalem. From 1948 on, West Jerusalem has been the formal capital of Israel. When Israel took control of East Jerusalem in 1967, the capital was declared united. On July 30, 1980, that was formalized. The Israeli Knesset passed a law declaring Jerusalem Israel's undivided capital. 13 national embassies in West Jerusalem left in protest. The International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, representing evangelical Christians from around the world, responded by establishing their own embassy. This program is about the ICEJ, which brings about 5,000 visitors to Israel to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. One has to admire their dedication and commitment, whatever your politics. Stay with us. My guest is Reverend Malcolm Heading. He's the Executive Director of the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. Welcome to the show, Malcolm.
Thank you so much. It's good to be with you.
I need to have some background on the ICEJ.
Well, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem was founded in 1980 because in that year, the Knesset, or the Parliament of Israel, passed what is now known as the Jerusalem Law. And the Jerusalem Law declared that Jerusalem is the undivided eternal capital of the Jewish people. And in response to that proclamation and the passing of that law, 13 foreign embassies, most of them Western, withdrew from the city to Tel Aviv in protest. And there were a number of Christians living in Israel and outside of the country who felt that this was an outrage, given the biblical, first of all, the biblical history and credentials of the city and its relationship with the Jewish people. Here's a people that have a 4,000-year association with the city that goes back to Abraham and Melchizedek, and then is defined more fully by King David, the first mayor, if you want to call him that, and king of Israel, who made it his capital 3,000 years ago. And given these facts and the verifiable data of the Bible that this is the city of the great king, and speaking primarily of what we now call the Old City, or East Jerusalem, these Christians felt that this was another outrage, a sort of another stab in the back of the Jewish people by the so-called Western Christian countries of the world, and that someone had to stand up and say, this is not true, that as Christian people, we will open an embassy here to declare a different type of response. And that is why the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem in September 1980 opened its doors in solidarity with the Jewish people and Jerusalem.
And who were the groups behind it? Were the Canadians behind it?
There were a number of Canadians behind it. There were people like Merv and Merla Watson, Jay and Meryl Rawlings, who came from Canada. There were Americans behind it, like Professor George Giacomakis, who was at that time the principal of the Institute of Holy Land Studies. There were people from Holland behind it, like Jan Willem van der Hoeven and Wedad van der Hoeven. There were people from England behind it, like Lance Lambert, the famous biblical expositor and teacher, and Derek Prince was behind it at the beginning. And you have people from South Africa behind it, like Basil Jacobs and Johan Lukhoff, and a few others. But that is essentially the founding group who brought this organization into existence.
Now, the theology behind it, because there's a lot when reading your material about God's promise and having faith in God's promise and the importance of the Jewish people association with Judaism. Can you give a brief summary of that?
Absolutely. This organization is not based on questions of prophecy, because as you know, Howard, if you talk to many Christians, as their faces differ, so their prophetic schemes differ. So you cannot build an institution of this size and importance on speculative prophetic views of Scripture.
Well,
and we all have our views
okay.
of Scripture and prophecy, and we all should. But this organization is built on a biblical promise. So it looks to the past, not to the future, for its founding credentials. And that promise is the promise that God made to Abraham 4,000 years ago, that this land and this people are married as an eternal partnership forever, not as an end in itself, but to pursue a God-given end, and that is the redemption of the world. And so the organization is founded on a strong, sound biblical covenant, out of which has flowed the redemptive purpose of God for the whole world. And even the book of Luke, the first chapter, concedes that John the Baptist and even Jesus in Luke chapter 1 came into the world because of God's faithfulness to the Abrahamic covenant. And Paul in Galatians chapter 3 states that the proclamation of the gospel in verse 8 was first made to Abraham when he promised him that in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. So this promise and engagement of God with Abraham, out of which flowed the Jewish people, was for the blessing of the world, and the land and the people are the vehicle of world redemption, the means by which God amplifies his voice to a lost world. So these are the crucial foundational pillars upon which this organization stands.
How big is this organization? It's certainly a very impressive building and embassy you have here, though people think of embassies as representing states.
People always want to know numbers. They don't mean too much for us, but we do have a figure that is conservative, not exaggerated, and reliable. And how do we get that figure? We get that figure because in the year 2000, and since then, as you well know, Jerusalem has become the trembling point of world attention, and especially a Jewish Jerusalem. Any other people group or nation, even the British can have it, but respectfully, God forbid that the Jews have Jerusalem. And so in the year 2000, we had a petition worldwide within our own family of supporting offices and constituencies around the globe that this should remain the eternal, undivided capital of the Jewish people. And that petition drew 14 million endorsements that we presented to Ehud Olmert, who was at that time the mayor of Jerusalem. So that's a considerable global movement. In terms of nations, we have offices in some 60 nations of the world, fully functional offices, and we have representation of different types in another 50-odd nations of the world. So we work in over 110 countries of the world, which is reflected again and verified by our annual Christian celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is Israel's biggest annual tourist event and solidarity mission. And that event that brings anything from 6,000 to 8,000 people to the city over the Feast of Tabernacles has participants from over 100 countries.
Describe that event briefly.
That event is a huge 8-day worship ministry, in a way, extravaganza. It's a great blessing from the worship music point of view. This organization actually pioneered Davidic worship in the world, which then spread throughout the world. And at the foundational root of that were Canadians in this regard, and that is Merv and Merla Watson. They were responsible for bequeathing to the world a new type of music in the Christian world that had this Davidic type of Jewish sound and ring to it that has then swept the world and gone everywhere. And that annual event to this present day has run unhindered now for over 30 years. And it brings to the city great preachers from all over the world. We've had everyone on our platform, from Derek Prince and Lance Lambert and David Pawson and Jack Hayford and you name it, we've had them. Even unknown preachers with very big churches have come here from different parts of the world, from Africa, from Scandinavia, from Southeast Asia. And this year, actually, we have Reinhard Bonnke coming in to attend this event and to be our major international speaker, along with many other great speakers. So it's a time when we draw Christians from all over the world into our theological understanding that this people need help, they need comfort, they need friends, they stand alone, they're becoming isolated. There's nothing they can do that's right. Even if they defend themselves, as we've seen this week, they demonized, they condemned without the facts. We saw yesterday that these major international media companies from England even are doctoring photographs in order to lie and tell another story, another agenda. So this organization in the hand of God has been used as a vital key to educating the world church on where Israel stands and why she is significant to the purpose of God. And the feast, with all its beautiful worship and music and orchestration and dance, is a strong theological projection of that mandate.
Well, I'd like to continue the discussion with you on the politics, but we'll have to take a break, and we'll stay with the politics and at least come back to the politics.
Absolutely, we love politics.
Malcolm, there's a peculiar thing for a Jew, and as a kid who grew up in Toronto, that Christians were seen as alien, or we had a group around the corner of evangelical Christians who were trying to convert Jews. And one of the things that's happened since the Second World War is the bringing together of evangelical Christians almost falling in love with Jews, I would say. That's on one hand. And then this extreme isolation of the centrality of Israel in the Jewish experience from the world, as you yourself described, as seemingly irrational. And it's a paradox, and I for one, find it difficult to comprehend. And I'd like to see your view of those things.
Actually, Howard, the sort of marriage, should we say, between Jews and evangelical Christians is not such a paradox or so strange as it may appear.
Well, you mean going back to the Christian Zionists of the 19th
No,
century?
even because of the evangelical worldview. Now, the evangelical world has had very little anti-Semitism within its ranks historically. That is a fact, even acknowledged by Israel, acknowledged by the leaders of Israel and the leaders of the evangelical movement. And why is that? It's because evangelicals are Bible believing, and they simply trust the word of God as it is. So if the prophet Isaiah says this is Israel, they say, great, this is the Jewish people. You know, they don't try and mess with the text and spiritualize it as the more historical, traditional churches have done, because they are the product of a certain series of events in history. We won't go into that, there's no time. So the evangelical church reads the Bible with a different type of prism, different type of spectacle. It lets the Bible speak for itself. It doesn't try to inject anything into it. It just lets the context. They're not literalists, they're not fundamentalists. They are contextualists. So for instance, if Jesus says, I am the door, evangelicals don't believe that he's a door. They take it in context. Okay, he's talking figuratively. But if the Bible says, in the latter days, as Isaiah says, Jerusalem will be a raised up entity and the nations of the world will flow to it to hear the word of the Lord. It will go forth from Zion, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and they shall learn war no more. They don't read, wow, this must be Rome, which the church has done in its historical, traditional context. They read, wow, what a destiny Israel and the Jewish people have. Wow, what happened here? And where's the church? So the evangelicals basically rest on a different approach to the Bible. And that's what makes this marriage so easy, actually, where the one fits in with the other. Now, the explanation that Paul uses to qualify that, this is before Christian anti-Semitism and the whole of history, is that there are olives and wild olives. but they're both an olive. And anyone who's into horticulture and everything else will tell you, if you want to stimulate a natural olive tree, then ingraft a wild olive tree. It just brings new life and new zeal and new excitement. And that's what's happening. These Christians have arrived.
Who are the wild olives and who are the...
Yeah, the wild olives are the Gentile Christians, according to Paul.
See.
And the Jews are the natural branch, the natural olive. And he says to the wider church, even in Romans 11, don't be arrogant against Israel. Don't get clever and smart and think you're better than them and all of this, because God will judge you. And so evangelicals have taken this warning at heart and recognize how easy it is then for two olives to dwell together, even though essentially they're different.
So
we're not trying to be Jewish. We are wild olives. I mean, look at my compatriot and fellow director, Dr. Jürgen Buhler. I mean, he's an absolute wild olive from Germany.
Well, we'll have him on after.
You'll have him on just now, but he's a wonderful wild olive. And if you hear what he's doing, what he's done through Germany, that he and his work has built the first home for Holocaust survivors in the whole of Israel. Do you know that? It's opening on the 19th of September. The state president will be there. The leaders of Israel will be there. This is the wild olive saying, wow, we're with you. We're going to stand with you. And we'll fight for you on behalf of Jerusalem. That's it.
Well, okay, then there's the parallel experience that here is Israel growing up, the nations founded, etc. But it's as if you have the world turning against Israel in an enormous way, in a somewhat irrational way, because you watch the events, whether it was the Gulf War, the Gaza War, or the flotilla incident, or one incident after the other, the disproportionate reaction, whatever the errors are committed, and the piling on in just an irrational way.
Absolutely, and we fight that battle every day.
But how do you explain it in your theology? Well,
we have a partnership. You will see it in our entrance foyer, officially signed with Yad Vashem. This is historic. Can you believe it? The Yad Vashem has an official partnership with an evangelical Christian organization, where we have a desk at Yad Vashem. Now, what does that mean? You see, the Holocaust and all of this through history is irrational. It gets to a level where you cannot explain the craziness and the wickedness that people are just somehow given to in Jew hatred. It is absolutely, as you say, overwhelming in its force.
Yeah, that human rights advocates who are cosmopolitan universalists are partners to Jew haters. And you can't. How does this work?
How does this work? Because beyond that, the Yad Vashem will tell you that this is a disease. As Christian people, we think it's a spiritual disease that can afflict anyone. And the rootedness of it has to do with the significance of the Jewish people. And if we take the biblical record as being true and right and honest, which it is, which speaks about the fall of man and man's hatred of God and man's resentment against God, and which is well documented in the Hebrew scriptures alone, never mind the Christian scriptures, where the prophet Jeremiah says the heart of man is desperately sick and wicked above all things. So the only way mankind can express his hatred of God is to take it out and to express it against the Jewish people. So as long as we live in the world as it is today, the Jewish people will become the target of a consistent and an unrelenting attack from the nations, and we better well understand that. And if we don't understand that, then we've not learned the history, the lesson from history. And that is why it is so important that people who love the Bible and appreciate its message and have been transformed by it come to the defense of the Jewish people, who after all gave it to the world. The Jewish people are a reflection and a reminder to the world of the existence of God, and people hate that. Why? It makes them accountable.
And so a good part of your program is advocacy, I gather.
A major part of our program is advocacy. I am telling you that the greatest battle now facing organizations like ours and Israel and everyone is now going to be on the diplomatic front. The demonization of Israel is at a level that I have never ever seen in recent decades. And we all better get up on our feet and begin to speak out, as the Prime Minister said, not on behalf of Israel, but on behalf of truth and decency and honesty, and have a very clear understanding of good and evil, which in turn will bring us to the defense of this people, because their history, their contemporary history, is absolutely defendable at every level, and we have no shadow of doubt or turning about it.
Well, it's a dilemma because, as a detached intellectual who believes in objectivity, I don't have your approach, where and you can clearly advocate, because I advocate, but it's always with nuances and.
We need to be careful of that, of respect, because I think that's the trap that the world fell into in 1933 and onwards, where let's give Herr Adolf a little bit of space. Let's give him room. He surely doesn't mean this. There must be another way to approach this, and then you get all the stories and the Chamberlain, and we can laugh at that and say, wow, how the guy was duped. No. I have a very strong feeling that if I was there at that time and had seen what Hitler had done in Germany, he pulled the place out of a massive economic catastrophe. He provided the people with work, secondly. He gave everybody a motor car. He built infrastructure. He gave dignity back to the German people after the travesty of Versailles, which we have to accept. But no one knew. Everyone then gave him, they did know, but no one was prepared to act on what they knew about his rhetoric. They thought, oh no, man, he's the savior of Germany. Look what he did. Even the royal family of England was infected with that disease. And said, no, he's a great guy. He doesn't mean all this stuff. Well, Ahmadinejad means it, let me tell you.
Anyway, I want to thank you, and we'll have Jürgen off after the break. My guest is now Jürgen Bühler. As mentioned earlier, you're the International Director of the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem.
Hi, Howard. It's a joy to meet you.
And you also run the German section. You have two jobs.
Yeah, I have two jobs in a way. I'm the director of our German branch, which is one of the biggest branches of the Christian Embassy. And I work here in Jerusalem as the international director, which means I take care of the more than 60 branches what we have worldwide, and try even to look into countries where we are not active yet.
Now, you did a PhD in physics at Weizmann, from reading your bio. And how do you relate that to being involved in this theology and in this missionary work, or whatever you want to call it?
Well, first of all, let me say there are many people, they ask me, well, how does science and belief in God and theology go together? And I was researching artificial diamonds. I made artificial diamonds in my lab, and had a unique kind of laser spectroscopy, how I investigated the growth of those diamonds. And as I was sitting many hours in front of the electron microscope, and I looked at those tiny, perfect crystals, how they are growing, and one atom after the other is in a perfect manner, is sitting beside the other. And I was sitting there and I was praising God. I said, that something like this is happening just out of chance and without any incredible, intelligent being out there who brought this order into science. It's not possible. And so for me, I think, if you are a scientist and not believe in God, I don't think it's possible, actually. And on the other side, the story why I'm doing today what I'm doing is, I moved 16 years ago to Israel, and I came here as a PhD student. And what really shocked me very much is to see the media reporting about current events in Israel, in Germany or other European nations, and to see here in Israel what really was taking place. For example, there was a terrorist attack, I well remember it, 13 years ago in Jerusalem. And a crazy Palestinian suicide terrorist decided to take his car straight onto a bus stop where something like 50 to 100 people were standing, and he went with high speed on that bus stop, and he almost killed probably dozens of people if there wouldn't have been a guard who took out his gun, and thanks God was able to take out this crazy guy in the right moment. Now, if you read this in our German media, they said, well, there was a radical Jewish settler who was killing this innocent Palestinian, and they were describing the sad story of his family. And if you decided to read the whole article to the very last sentence, which probably most people don't do, you could find out that he was actually a suicide terrorist trying to kill many people. And this was one of the events which really triggered me. Well, we have to speak out on what's really happening here in the country, and we have to become advocates. And then, of course, I have a very strong theological background for my family. My father was a Pentecostal pastor in Germany, so I always felt inclined to religious matters, and those two things really draw me into the ministry of the International Christian Embassy.
But in Europe, there's been a really big change towards an attitude to Israel, all over Europe. I mean, there are some exceptions under different governments, but that's been the general trend. Do you directly deal with that issue?
Well, the Christian Embassy over the last maybe 5 to 6 years was very active in Brussels, in the very heart of the European Union. We launched a number of initiatives, some of them very successful, in order to address some issues of European anti-Israeli politics. And one of them, for example, was the issue of Palestinian aid, or aid to the Palestinian people, which we didn't say it should be stopped, because, of course there are needy people. But if you look at those billions and billions of dollars and euros which were spent on the Palestinian people, a lot of them at that time went into the terrorism infrastructure. Some of their money, and that was a significant part, they estimate today even up to 50% just evaporated into nothing. That means it ended up into the pocket of some very wealthy Palestinian leaders. And we tackled those issues, and some of our material which we published even ended up into the House of Commons in the United Kingdom, ended up in the Finnish Parliament, reached the ear of the Commissioner in the European Union, which is in charge of handing out the money towards those groups. And thanks God we saw that our initiative at least played a significant role in changing the policy, at least to some degree. Another issue which we tackled was the issue of refugees. If you look at the refugee issue of the Palestinian people, it's the only entity or the only ethnic group worldwide where the United Nations allows even the descendants and even the great children of refugees to come back to their homeland. With every other people group, they tell you, well, you have to get integrated into the country where you are a refugee. We had in Germany, where I come, more than 11 million refugees.
And 1 million died, and 1 million Germans died in the displacement. I'll send you my book, a new book coming out this fall with Columbia University Press, called The Right of Return.
Well, I would love to read that.
Which deals with that issue, exactly. But you also have a program, a Holocaust in Germany, and in Haifa, related to Holocaust survivors?
Yeah, absolutely. The Christian Embassy, it's not only a German project, but it was mainly funded by German Christians, and I felt very relieved when I saw there was a very big readiness from German Christians to support that project. But it's a project in Haifa which established a very unique house which will be hosting Holocaust survivors in the coming weeks. The official opening will be in September, and it will be a house where up to 70 Holocaust survivors will find a home. I just talked maybe 2-3 weeks ago with one of the leading psychologists from the Haifa hospital, the Rambam hospital, and she's working exclusively with Holocaust survivors. And I asked her, I said, Doctor, please tell me, what is the main problem of Holocaust survivors today? And I expected maybe she tells about their traumatic flashbacks and the memory coming back to nightmares or whatever, which you have even until today. But she said the number one problems of Holocaust survivors today is loneliness. Most of them are widows. They don't have anybody who wants to listen to their story about the past. So this center on the bottom floor has a community center where Holocaust survivors from the entire area of Haifa can come and meet each other. They can play cards, they can have a lunch together, they can watch television together. On the top floors or top stories of that building, more than 70 Holocaust survivors are finding a home where they can live. Today you have to know from the 200,000 Holocaust survivors which are still living here in Israel. Some of them, they still have the tattoos of Auschwitz and other concentration camps. More than 30% of those 200,000 people are living below the poverty line. So this house is directed especially to those people who don't have a proper living, who don't have a nice place to be, and we try to help them.
Do you have some kind of ambivalent feelings that why isn't the state building this? Why isn't the Jewish community building old age senior citizens home for Holocaust survivors? Why should Christians do it?
Well, I see it like that it's a fantastic opportunity for us Christians to show Christian love and Christian compassion to those people. And it's indeed, you know, even triggering a healing process, which I think is much more powerful than if the government of Israel would have provided it. I never remember, maybe 2 months ago when I was the first time up in Haifa, there was this Holocaust survivor from Germany. His name was Josef Kindlich. And I met him there, and after he heard I came from Germany and we are building this house there, it suddenly bubbled out of him and he started to tell me his whole life story, how he escaped Buchenwald, how he was in Auschwitz, how he was in 2 other concentration camps, and that he even survived the death march. And he was just talking for maybe 15 minutes with me, and it was very moving for me, of course, as German, to listen to his story. Later on, his wife came and he said, "Jürgen, do you know what happened right now? My husband made a vow some 50 years ago. He said, I'm never going to speak German anymore." And he just spoke for the first time German again. And I realized that this house is not only providing a house for him, but it actually provided healing for his soul even.
Well, we'll have to continue this, but I just want to make my own remark. The idea that you always see things as an opportunity rather than worrying about whether somebody else is doing it, and the healing provisions of it rather than you being special in doing this, I'm very impressed. But we'll take a break and we'll come back to some of your other work.
Okay, thanks so much.
Jürgen, you also have an active program and you participate in facilitating Aliyah. I think Jews would be very surprised to learn that you facilitate and work with, I think, from Argentina and from Brazil and even from Sweden. I read that you help move people here. I was quite, that's how I reacted when I read it.
Well, you're absolutely right. The Christian Embassy over the last, I believe, almost 20 years now. It started in 1990 when the Iron Curtain opened in the former Soviet Union. The Christian Embassy was involved in bringing home more than 100,000 Jewish people over the last 2 decades. And as a matter of fact, the Christian Embassy sponsored the very first airplane exclusively dedicated to Aliyah from the former Soviet Union to Israel in the end of 1990, beginning of 91, where our German branch, my predecessor in Germany, collected money from German Christians, and they handed over the check to a Jewish agency, and they said, we want to charter an entire El Al jumbo jet to bring new immigrants back. And from then on until today, I think we chartered up to 60 airplanes to bring people who want to immigrate to Israel and who want to make Aliyah back to this land. And of course, over the last decades, or the last years, I should say, the wave of Aliyah from the former Soviet Union decreased, and the numbers went down to, I think, a few thousand every year who want to come from the former Soviet Union. But we see in places like France, for example, where a new phase of anti-Semitism and a new wave of anti-Semitism is sweeping over the country, we see there is a new readiness of people to come to Israel. France today is the second largest Jewish community after the United States, the third largest after the United States and Russia. We have programs, as you said, in Argentina, in Brazil. We're actually right now, as we are sitting here, we have a activity going on in Brazil to bring, I think, 15 to 20 Jewish people back from Sao Paulo. And right now we are working even in Sweden and Scandinavia. We brought the first immigrant, or the first person from Sweden over many years back to Israel just a few weeks ago.
And you also then, between Aliyah, you also work on integration, because you work with the Ethiopians, because they have particular problems in adapting to Israel.
It's not only the Ethiopians, and I think we have to understand, if you talk about Aliyah, And especially if you are talking about countries like the former Soviet Union and third world countries like Ethiopia, the big challenge is not to bring those people here to Israel, but once they are here, to get them integrated into society. And if you talk about people from Ethiopia, you are talking about people sometimes which are living in a mud hut for many decades. They are living in generations in a very backward-driven third world society. They don't even know what is an electrical plug or electrical socket. They never used in their whole life a refrigerator in their kitchen. They don't know what is a kitchen sink, etc. So those people arrive here in Israel, and you have to teach them literally the very basic stuff, what is very natural for you and for me in our daily life, but they never saw that. They don't know what is an airplane. Some of those even thought it's a miracle that they are sitting in this big metal bird, and they are by a miracle, by the hand of God, brought here to the land of their fathers. So it's a big challenge the nation of Israel faces. And it's indeed, I think, the Ethiopian community today in Israel, which is the community in Israel which is probably the most vulnerable one. If you look to some of those kids, they end up in drug abuse and many other things, and we really feel we have to dedicate our work and our time to help those young kids to get a future here in this great country.
Do you have any ambivalence about it? Because some of them, the latest movement, are people Ethiopians who were Christians in the last several generations, were forcefully or voluntarily, it's hard to know, converted to Christianity and want to come back to be Jewish, and they're facilitated to move here. Does that bother you at all that they were previously Christians and they're becoming Jewish?
Well, I think, first of all, we are here to help the state of Israel, and if the Jewish Agency feels they need help and we can help, I think we definitely do that. And I think if people were forcefully drawn to Christianity, I think they never were really in their heart really Christians. And I believe if you really have a Christian experience and an experience with Jesus, I think you are not giving that up. Some of them, it might just mean that they find out about their Jewish identity, which might be added to that. And it's a very complicated matter. We don't ask people, if we know they are Jewish, we don't ask them, what do you believe? And we don't ask them to fill in a form about their faith. If they want to come to the state of Israel, and if the Jewish Agency or the government tells they have a Jewish background, it's our pleasure and our privilege to help them to come back to the country.
Tell me about your programs for Christians coming here, because that's a big part of your mandate.
Well,
just to say something, during the last Intifada, my wife and I were startled because liberal Jews stopped coming, in a large part. But the Catholics continued coming and the evangelicals continued coming in spite of it. They ignored the Intifada. And that was, quite revealing.
Well, I think Malcolm shared about it already. The Feast of Tabernacles is one of our highlights every year, where we try to bring literally thousands of Christians here to the country to celebrate the Jewish Feast of Sukkot, which I think is already a mind-boggling and a startling thought that Christians are coming here to Israel to celebrate the Jewish holiday. But then beyond the Feast of Tabernacle, it's a very big desire for us to connect Christians to the land of Israel. Not in the sense that we want them to settle here or want to live here in the country, but I think for every Christian, once you have been here and once you traveled through Judea, once you travel through the holy places here, you are reading your Bible with a complete different eye. If you read Bethlehem, you actually have in your mind a certain place. If you read about Jerusalem, you actually understand what the Bible talks about. It's one of the Bible scholars here in this country, they call the country of Israel is actually like a fifth gospel, because it explains even in a fuller way the message of Jesus.
Well, and when they come here, you find that really works. It's that they really get married committed to Israel.
I think it depends from group to group. You definitely have many groups which come for the first time. They are rushing just from one holy site to the other, and many of them. That's how I came to Israel. I came on a guided tour to Israel, which basically was rushing me. The logo was, "You're running where Jesus was walking."
That's a good expression, because I find those tours a little hard to take personally. But it's true.
But what it did to me, even though it was a very stressful and a very packed time, it really made me fall in love with this country. Not only because of the holy sites, actually that's the thing which I didn't care too much, but when I was sitting in the evening there and had Israeli food and were talking to some Israeli and got engaged with them and heard firsthand their own experiences in this land, it really made me fall in love with this country, and it made my wife and me decide to come here and study here. And on top of that, of course, if you are traveling through this country, I think everybody who comes here, he has an experience where the Bible will become much more lively to you than before.
But one of the things you must encounter, I'm sure, is with all its initiative and innovation and excitement and the warmth and all those things, there's a kind of harshness here and incivility. And do you find that a little difficult, you and your wife, in dealing with it?
Well, I'm living since 16 years here, and to be very honest, each time we go back on holiday to Germany with our kids, we are
how many kids do you have?
We have 4 children, three sons, and then we were surprised just recently with a little baby princess.
Oh, wow. How old are your boys?
The oldest one is 12, and the youngest is 6, and then we have a 1.5 years old daughter. And the boys, they speak fluent Hebrew, they go to Israeli schools. They love it to be here because, of course, all their friends are Israelis, and it's their home, that's where they were born. And even for us, which are used to another culture back home, we really feel that's a great place. It's maybe sometimes rough, you are right, and people are not as friendly here in a shopping mall like you are used maybe in Canada or Germany. But on the other side, it's a very exciting country, and it's a place where you never have a boring moment. So if I'm in Germany, it's very orderly and everything is very quiet, and after 1 month I'm ready to go back to excitement here in Israel.
Well, I want to thank you, Jürgen. But one last question. If you said what the most important message that you wanted to give out, how would you summarize it about Israel?
I think the Christian church today is challenged really to stand with Israel. I just read yesterday again the book of Esther, and Queen Esther was faced with a situation where the government of Iran at that time, the kingdom of Persia, made a decree basically to wipe out the entire Jewish population in its kingdom and its realm of influence. And there was this little Jewish girl being the queen, the first lady of that empire. And her uncle approached her and said, you know, Esther, you have to do something for us, and you have the ear of the king. And she said, well, I'm not so sure if I should do it. Maybe I risk my position, and maybe he's going even to kill me or kick me out. You see what happened to my predecessor, and so on. And then he says something very significant to Queen Esther. He said, you know, if you don't speak up now, God will raise up somebody else to save his people, but you and your house, you perish. And if I look back to the German history, even among the Pentecostal movement in Germany, not all of them, but there was one stream of Pentecostalism in Germany. They even adopted in their bylaws a phrase which says, Jews are not allowed in our movement because they killed Jesus. The interesting thing about that is the Jewish people survived, and you even have a state of Israel, a very blossoming state of Israel. This Pentecostal movement is hardly existing anymore today. And the message to Queen Esther was that he says, it's not about the survival of the Jewish people. God doesn't need you. If you don't speak up, somebody else will do the job. But it's about your survival. And if you don't speak up, you will perish. The Jewish people, they will survive. Am Israel Chai, but you will perish. And I think that's the message of the church today. We have to take our stand with God's people. And I think if we do that, God will bless us. But if we refuse to do so, I think we are entering into a time of judgment.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. I appreciate you coming on the program.
It was a great joy and pleasure. Thanks you so much.